Can everyone see the shared screen? Okay. Thank you. Let's go ahead and get started. It's exactly the time. All right, so today we're going to talk about building personal resiliency, how to cope during these uncertain times. I know that none of us expected to be wearing masks or working from home or having to deal with all the interesting ways that we're having to work around our regular approach to business as usual. So today I just want to kind of go over resiliency and how you can build it in yourself, how you can encourage it within the community. And a lot of things that I think we honestly all probably learned in kindergarten, but it's very hard to do some of those things. It's kind of awkward. And so I'm trying to give you some tools so that you will better be able to find comfort in setting a pattern to kind of build up your resiliency. Because, you know, in all candor, who's to know what next year will bring? You just never know anymore. I mean, I could have never predicted this. I don't think anybody who wasn't a scientist could have come up with this. Only maybe Netflix. All right, so let's get started. Our objectives are going to be to define resiliency and its importance, identify what characteristics enable resiliency, assess your resiliency quotient, understand how to increase our own personal resiliency, identify ways of supporting resiliency development in others, including in our organizations or communities that we're involved with. So before I get started, I just want to share a little bit about me. I am Jennifer S. Lewis. I am the Assistant Director of Compliance and Ethics at the University of Southern Mississippi here in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, the hub city. Our university does have 2 campuses. One campus is on the coast, so keep us in mind as the weather will get bad. We did get hit hard during many other hurricanes, so we're hoping that it goes way off course from us, but you just never know with these types of situations. And we are in a low-lying area there right by the beach on our Gulf Coast campus. So resiliency is something that we here in the Gulf have become very much accustomed to because the weather has been our enemy. Basically, resiliency is about, or encompassed in this image. You see the tree, it's bending, but it's not breaking. It's adapting to the conditions around it. It is the ability to spring back without breaking, to go beyond the limits that you set for yourself or that you might set for yourself in the regular course of times, and instead look at each challenge as an opportunity to go further than you had imagined. You know, which I think all of us are resilient nowadays because everything that we're living with is much different than what we consider our norm. You also have to resist the pressures exerted upon you by the environment and overcome stress and adversity. And that's the interesting thing. Overcoming stress is much easier said than done, as we all know. And a lot of us, you know, higher education as a whole, we've had, I don't know about y'all, but it feels like so much more work because it's almost like we opened a can of worms. It's all about or lateral to COVID-19 and all the other things it's required us to do to adapt to the environment we live in now. A lot of times you'll hear people talk about resiliency in terms of adversity, trauma, tragedy, 9/11, the bombings, things like that. Ultimately, what we're looking at is figuring out how to enhance your psychological wellness in the face of adversity. So you'll be able to cope no matter what the situation is. So these are really good tools and resources that helps us to bounce back quickly, because that really is the goal, to bounce back quickly. I mean, no one
cannot hear anything.
I'm sorry?
Where's the sound?
There you go, sorry. I'm going to mute that person. Okay, so again, we're trying to bounce back quickly. Everyone is going to, like the tree, bend somewhat because that's the reality of it. We don't know what's around the corner, so we have to bend and be flexible to adapt to the situation. But the goal is to get back to where we were, or at least a new norm, as quickly as possible so it can be as painless as possible. But again, it is a learning experience. One of the big things that I found when I was doing this research about resiliency is the most important thing is to admit that it did happen. You know, we are in a pandemic. Bad things happen to people. People do things that are horrific. You know, that's just the world that we live in. Not everyone is a good person. Not every situation can have necessarily a positive outcome. But the worst thing you can do is not admit that this is the situation that we're in, because you have to be able to look at where you're at to kind of figure out how to cope and how to get yourself back to the status quo. So I've got these individuals on here. Can anyone name them? Does anyone recognize any of those folks? Mary, do you recognize anybody? Let's see who else is on here.
Oprah? I'm going to say Oprah.
Yeah. So did you know, well, and you may know this about Oprah because she's been very public about this, that she at 14 was pregnant and she was abused. But despite all that, she was able to become, you know, basically the social, cultural, and taste icon that she is, even starting her own network. Does anyone recognize the person furthest to the left? Now, this is a person that's been in a lot of movies, TV shows. No one? No one wants to guess?
Gabriella Union.
That's right. Now, why do you think I have Gabrielle Union on here? Have you ever heard her story? No? She was actually an employee at a Payless shoe store when she was a teen, and she was raped there. And despite that, she decided that she wasn't going to let that backtrack her life. And she has gone on to become a successful actress. And if you remember recently, she filed gender discrimination, sexual harassment charges against NBC for the culture that they were perpetuating there at America's Got Talent. So she's an outspoken person who, you know, takes the problem and figures out how to solve it. And that's a part of what resiliency is. What about the second person? Does anybody recognize that person?
Joyce Myers.
Yes. Did you know Joyce had a horrific childhood of verbal and sexual abuse? But she's taken that and she's been able to move forward, and she's a leader with a thriving ministry. And anybody know the last person on there? She hasn't.
I recognize the face, but I can't remember her name.
Yeah, hasn't been in the limelight recently. She's been raising her child that she adopted. She is Charlize Theron, Academy Award winner, and she was actually the witness of her mother killing her alcoholic father in self-defense. So as you can see, they had some horrific situations occur to them, but despite that, they managed to surmount those challenges and become resilient enough to survive and move forward and be successful. So obviously, as they illustrate, it's possible with each of us to do so. It's just a matter of figuring out how to do so. So hopefully today we're going to figure out some tools that we can do to make ourselves more comfortable in being resilient. So what are the characteristics? As you can see, there's a lot of characteristics. Some of them you could see, like Oprah. I could see Oprah as an independent person, setting future goals. Oprah and Gabrielle Union, you know, they already had, at a young age, their idea of what they wanted to do with their lives. Understanding their own self-worth, so some confidence. And I think that's a lot of the things that we struggle with, not just as people, but as women, because it sounds, I don't know if y'all are like me, but it sounds almost narcissistic to like toot your own horn and say, you know, I'm great at this. And so when people say that to me, I just kind of try to ignore it and let their little comment just kind of go off. But the reality is we need to understand our own self-worth, because the more that we value ourselves, the stronger that we are. It creates our own self-confidence in ourselves. Problem solving, trauma, stress, those are problems, and ultimately you as an individual have to solve them. The only way that you can really solve them is by examining them piece by piece, kind of breaking down the problem, and we'll talk about that a little more in a later slide, so that you can have the background to make an informed decision, so that the way that you solve the problem puts you in a better place than you were. And it could be all sorts of different problems. Like we had problems with how to work remotely because we had never really done that at work. So that's some of the problems that we as an organization had to surmount and figure out how to get all those things to work so we continue functioning or otherwise potentially maybe get laid off, you know, if we really couldn't work at home when all this pandemic started. Optimism, that's one that I personally have some troubles with. There's a lot of negativity about that. You know, you probably all heard that saying about Pollyanna. You know, it's almost like people make fun of people like they're so positive. Has anyone had that experience where people have said something about positivity, but in a negative way, like, you know, like it's almost like a joke, like it's over the top? Anybody? I've always heard that Pollyanna mentality is something like that has been referenced when I've talked to people and they said something about someone. This person's always happy. You know, I don't know if you've seen the commercial for Progressive Insurance where Flo's on there and they're on a Zoom call, in fact, and the other girl goes, yeah, she's always smiling. I bet she smiles while she's asleep, because it's like a joke, because people think that, you know, being positive is not realistic, but it should be. I mean, we have to be positive and optimistic to be able to go beyond these negative situations. And that's one of the things that's kind of awkward for people. Again, you're looking at managing feelings, but not just your own feelings, but those around you. Because it's going to be hard to get past some of these situations if everyone else is so negative about things. Again, as you saw from the pictures of the individuals that we looked at, all those pictures are people who never gave up. Despite their circumstances, they were able to succeed, but part of that was their tenaciousness. They knew what they wanted to do and they just moved forward with that. And again, part of that is having what they call an internal locus of control. So a person who has a high internal locus of control feels that their own actions can affect the outcome of an event. So rather than just being a passive person who just waits for things to happen, they figure out how they're going to solve something. And so that's one of the biggest things of this whole resiliency is you can't just passively wait for things to resolve themselves. You have to actively find solutions. But how do we know how resilient we are? Well, there are resilience questionnaires that will as quickly as 12 to 15 questions, tell you how resilient you are and give you some ideas as to how to improve your resiliency. The thing with that is, that I want you to remember is that no matter how much resilience we have, more resilience is always beneficial. But we also need to notice that we really don't need a questionnaire. We could, if we have the time and we're able to exert the effort, simply watch how quickly it takes us to come back after a stressful situation or after a tragedy. How long does it takes us to bounce back? That is an assessment of resilience. Obviously, people feel more comfortable with numbers. So that's one of the things that we're going to talk about quickly with the next slide about resiliency quotient. But again, resilience questionnaires evaluate self-control, or your ability to act rather than react, because you've got to control your emotions, because the enemy of resiliency is simply acting on emotion. One of the persons whose videos I watched was talking about the fact that the easiest thing for your brain to do is simply go on the same path it has before. So if a situation caused you stress and what you did before was run away from the situation, like I don't like conflict, so I'll try to figure out a way just to avoid that completely, you know? Like for instance, recently I had an issue with my neighbor and I probably should have gone over there and talked to her about it and told her she's unreasonable. But instead I kind of just caved in. And that's one of the things I need to work on, and asserting myself and saying, you know what, I'm going to sit there and say that I have rights too. And so that's one of the things about acting instead of reacting. So my reaction was to try to run away and avoid the situation completely at my detriment. Adaptability, the ability to improvise when necessary, including being flexible. And that's really one of the key criteria of what's going on recently is flexibility, because we're all learning how to function in this new time frame where everything is slightly askew. Optimism, again, it's important to be realistic, but also be positive. So we don't want to be a Pollyanna where everything is positive, but we want to think of ways that we can change the negatives into positives. And then you have to trust your own skills and strengths. Have confidence in both your abilities and your intuition, and that's the self-sufficiency, and tenaciousness or persistence. So you can't never give up, because that is the piece of resiliency. It could take time to cope with whatever is going on, and so you cannot give up in that time frame. So let's look at some of these resiliency quotients. So the first one I scored a 37 on, and the 37 is actually the lowest that you can score. But the reason I wanted to highlight that is the fact that people will often use me as an example of who they think is resilient. Someone actually did that to me in a presentation on campus because of something, and I'll go ahead and share it with you so it'll make more sense. About 4 years ago today, my partner was killed in a car accident on his way to work. He was run over by 3 individuals who were on meth and were driving the wrong way on the highway. So after that, and within like 3 days, I went to work because I had to. I had things to do, and it was just me supporting me. So I have a choice. But people took that to mean that I was resilient. Look at me, I bounced back. So my point being that some of these scores really reveal the truth, because I am not very resilient. I have a lot of coping mechanisms that allow me to function despite everything. So the score of 37 is very low. It's in the lowest category of all. It shows that I need significant improvement with many areas. So what I would suggest to you is to go through these. Now, I can provide this PowerPoint. You can email me at jennifer.lewis@usm.edu. And you can go through all those. There's one that's the resilience test. It's 50 questions, but they're all asking similar questions. They're asking you to assess yourself in different situations. And that's really the goal, to kind of see how you're reacting in different situations and how much control you have both over your actions and your reactions. So after you figure out what your resiliency quotient is, what exactly are you going to do with that information? Well, each of those resiliency quotient tests actually tell you different things that you need to do and give you advice and links. So those are very helpful. But generally speaking, I wanted to kind of address the types of things you need to do to kind of increase your resiliency on a day-to-day basis. Support. Sorry, something is, okay, chat. Support is buzzing. Oh, the email address again, I'll type it in here. Hold on, I'll type it to everyone. It's jennifer.lewis@usm.edu. Okay, does everyone see the email address? Okay. All right, so how to increase your resilience. So you see there's a lot of things you have to do. And it's kind of all, if you look at them, they're all kind of pretty much, I don't want to say unnatural, but things that are kind of awkward. So make connections. So networking with people and getting a community of support. So one of the things that the research shows is people who are already in a group, even like NAB, would do better in a crisis situation. So like, I don't know if some of you are on the professional development committee. We met during the crux of all this. And one of the things we did is kind of just checked in with each other. Kind of like a mental check to say, hey, this is what's going on with us. This are the struggles we're experiencing. This is the situation we have here. We don't have toilet paper. You know, the internet's not working. All these things caused by COVID. And it seems strange, but those connections and that support of having the similar experience helped make things seem, I don't know, better, but tolerable. You know, like we were all kind of in the same boat. So it did provide some support, and that's a very important component of resiliency and building resiliency. So the next thing is controlling your emotions. So again, the natural reaction is to view things negatively. We tend to not praise ourselves. We tend to feel uncomfortable saying, you know, Mary is great at organizing things. Well, one of the things that they recommend is that you use a technique called bridging. So if you feel awkward with a comment like that, Mary, you might say, I'm not the worst at organizing things. And then it feels a little bit better, you know, because it's not like you're bragging, because it's awkward and we've been taught like not to be braggarts. But having confidence in yourself and saying nice things about yourself, it does seem so awkward to me. Like even when people say things to me, it just is something that I just kind of want to make it go away, because it kind of puts you in the spotlight in a way that just is not natural. And we kind of got to change that mindset. This is the hardest one, I think. Communicate your emotions assertively, but not aggressively. So I think that human nature is defensive. So you know that when something happens, you're on the defense. And that's why people have such issues with like constructive criticism, because you want to know how to do better, but you don't want them to say you did bad. You know, you don't want to hear that you didn't quite meet their expectations. It's very painful. So the same way, it's kind of difficult to say what you're feeling, but not feel like you have to like be not even aggressive, but vocal and very staunch about it. Say, you know, I am angry. And it almost seems aggressive just by the way that you're saying it. So that you have to figure out how to balance that with expressing yourself, but not having them perceive it as an aggression. You have to really learn to accept and manage change. I think we all learned in the past, what has it been, 6 months, 7 months? I don't even know, I've lost track. I guess it's 7 months, right? In the past 7 months, we've all learned to accept and manage change. So that's good. But do you remember how, like on March 13th and March 17th, you thought to yourself, I don't know about y'all, but I honestly thought maybe the world is over, you know? Because I was like, there's no bread, there's no toilet paper, there's no gas. Will I get a check? Will I be laid off? You know, all the things that were like staples of our day-to-day just kind of were thrown out the window. And you had to sit there and figure out how to reach for some type of stability. So it's like I was saying, those conversations with our NAP friends really helped, because everyone was going through the same things. And it helped us to accept the changes that we were going to have to make. And that maybe things, who's to know, don't go back to being the way they were. You know, online learning is a bigger thing than it was. Maybe we never go inside the bank. Maybe we have to do drive-through banking forever, which is not fun. Another thing that we want to talk about is perspective. So when you're feeling emotional, I think it's easy to kind of get drowned in those emotions and not really understand the big picture of things. And it's probably the hardest thing to remove yourself from the emotion and look at how you can make things better for yourself. And that's really how you become resilient. You eliminate the time that's involved in getting from where you were to that bad situation back to where you want to be. So the sooner that you're not like languishing in those emotions and you're actually thinking about how you can solve the problem by keeping things in perspective, you know, there's always someone worse off. Like my grandma said, people in other countries don't have food, you know, there's always someone worse off. You know, we have a job. We might have way too much work now than what we ever imagined we would have, but we do have a job, you know, so you have to think about the positive things toward it. And you have to move toward goals. Like even though in the middle of all this pandemic, you know, some of us are taking classes, some of us are trying to finish our proposal for our dissertation that we still did not finish yet because there's so much work to do at night. I mean, you really have to think about the goals and the bigger picture and the long term, because part of the getting past the issue or the trauma or the shift is looking at things as a longer term situation that you're going to move out of this problem. You also want to nurture your self-esteem or confidence. Like I said, you're your own cheerleader and you've got to really be comfortable with that. And like I really don't think there's anything other than positivity that's hardest for me, because it's not that you don't have self-esteem, it's just awkward to voice that self-esteem and to tell people what you think of yourself. And again, you do need to take care of yourself, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but there's certain things that you want to do to take care of yourself. And honestly, it's also kind of your contribution to not spreading the pandemic, if you think about it. And it'll make more sense when I go over that slide. Let's see. All right, so problem solving is key for resiliency. Again, your focus is on solving the problem, not letting your emotions kind of overrule you and guide you in a different direction. The amygdala, which controls your fight or flight response, that is what is automatically going to want to get you mad or angry, sad. it kind of just runs the gamut of emotions. And you got to kind of remove that and think about how is it I'm going to fix this problem? Because being emotional about it long term isn't going to solve the problem. It's not going to solve itself. Whatever the problem is, you have to solve it yourself to get yourself back to status quo. So right there are the 5 steps to problem solving. You're going to look at it kind of like a strategy, just like a business plan. What's the situation? What are the options? I select and act on an option, then I look at the results, and then I modify to optimize. So it's kind of like a circle, because you're going to continue like to loop through it, because you may have to make several tweaks to whatever it is that you decide is the solution to the problem, because sometimes things change too. Like you may pick a perfect solution for April of 2020, and in December of 2020, that is no longer an accurate solution. You're going to have to make some kind of change. And those are factors that are kind of out of your control. You just kind of have to keep observing things and move forward from there. So I like technology. I'm sure all of y'all probably realize that from the Tuesday tips. So what I want to include were some things that would help you, practically speaking, and would be easy to get to without too much time or trouble. So there's several apps here and a video. And they're all talking about how to increase your resilience. So part of resilience is being grateful for what you have. Like I said, it's perspective, empathizing with others, and being mindful. So recognizing your situation, stopping yourself from negative self-talk. So I know some of you have probably heard that in the realm of meditation. So that's another component we'll talk about shortly, because it is hard to quiet your thoughts, especially now that we're doing so much multitasking. It's very difficult. And then we're at home sometimes, and then I got a dog here, a cat here, the neighbor who doesn't go to work and walks around the street 50 times a day now that she has nothing to do at all. So we have all those situations, but each of those provides you an opportunity to, get on your phone, as you can see on the first 2, and just take some time for yourself. Nurture yourself by taking some time to figure out how to relax yourself and how to evaluate your day, so you can see how to remove stressors. Because again, as you see through the day, certain things are going to just bother you. And those things are things that you can consider problems that you can solve. You just have to take the time to identify those things and figure out your coping mechanism so you can get you back to where it's not bothering you anymore. Other ways to increase resilience. Now, I love this because I don't know if y'all have seen like the bullet journal and all those neat journals that you see on Facebook that pop up in those ads. There are some great journals that you can use to actually journal your thoughts and worries onto the page. And then you can look back. And I think, honestly, I'm sure that we'll probably see books for people that kept a journal during the pandemic, just of their mindset and all the different situations they encountered. And it would be interesting, even if you weren't looking at it from an improvement of resiliency standpoint, to just look at, it's October, now it's January, what happened here, what things bothered me, what strange things occurred that threw me off, my centralized happy homeostasis place. We also want to engage with the community support like NAP. Since we're probably remote and distancing and all that, online is probably the best way. But there's groups on Facebook for just about everything. So for instance, when I was struggling with that issue for grief 4 years ago, I joined like 4 different support groups for grief on Facebook, and took really no time. I would see things from other people and I would support them and they would support me. So there's a lot of people out there that want to have a sense of community despite the distance between folks. So anything that you really need support for, you could probably go on Facebook, just type in the word and group, and you will find it, because there's always at least one person that wants to start a group on a particular topic. So I highly recommend that. It's very convenient, and it really is kind of nurturing. We're all bad at this. We don't take very good care of ourselves. Not only do we sometimes skip lunch and then wonder why we're angry, sometimes we don't make time to spend time with family and friends, especially now that we're social distancing. And then rest is bad. We're not very good at resting consistently. I I am probably the worst at that because I sleep in all sorts of weird ways, like a couple hours and then, wake up. And then, so it's important that you HALT, halt those practices. So address your hunger. Do not be angry as a result of that hunger and or the environment you're in. Figure out how to spend some time with someone, even if it is just a Facebook chat or, one of those other apps that you can get on and talk to someone. And then get some rest. The fact is that if you don't get rest, you're probably going to get sick. It does affect your immune system adversely. And then if you're sick, this is one of the things that we're not culturally inclined to do, is take time off. If we have the sniffles, we're like, we'll still go into work, and our head hurts, we still go into work. And this is one of the things that you can do to help this whole issue with the pandemic is if you feel sick, just stay home. The reality is you probably should and could work from home if you needed to, if you didn't feel that bad. But the chance of you spreading something, given all the stuff that's going on, is very high. So it's best to take that time off and recuperate and get yourself healthy so you don't put extra stress on your body. Earlier, we were talking about self-talk or negative talk. So we want to do positive self-talk. So this is really easy. I think all of us could do this. Write 3 to 5 things a day that you like about yourself. And it sounds like bragging. It sounds very awkward, but you can use those bridge statements, like I said. So instead of saying, I'm a hard worker, I'm the hardest worker in the state of Mississippi, or, whatever, you could say, it is possible that I'm not as lazy as I think I am. It's strange little things, but saying it in that way makes it a little bit more palatable to me because it doesn't sound like you're bragging. You're just saying, hey, I'm not as bad as everybody else. I'm me. I'm working toward being better. And then another thing that's important is managing your impulses, whether that be any overeating, whatever. Use an impulse log. And again, this is one where you can write what your impulse is, what triggered it, and what you can do instead. And so even if you just get angry and you're like, oh, I'm just so angry, and that's what you feel, you can figure out what it is that's setting you off. Sometimes I'll get set off, honestly, by people just continually giving me stuff to do and with no consideration of the fact that I have 10 other million things to do. And then they want to bump to the front. I'm like, but I'm working on 10 other things. And how do I prioritize that? Who am I going to, yeah, right? Whose needs am I going to meet? And honestly, I'm very bad at that. And what I'll probably do, honestly, is 2 things. One, the big boss gets whatever he wants. If he wants me to look up, the ABCs for his grandchild or scan his genealogical history, I'll do it. It makes no sense. And it was a big waste of my time because I had other important things to do, but I did it. And then I'll go home, take a nap, get back up in 2 hours and start over again. But that's not really fair to me. So I've got to figure out a way of saying, and this is what I'm going to start working on, is asking the question of, I've got these other projects. How should I prioritize this? And it's so awkward, but it's very professional if you think about it, because you're asking them for their input, you're giving them some control, but you're also informing them, I'm working on this, this, and this. So in the scheme of things, what priority should this project have? So I can address it accurately. And they'll probably be impressed that you thought about it, because most people just go, whatever, and they figure out something. I used to work in a department where they used to tell me just to do the last thing they told me, right? And then don't do anything on anything else if I couldn't do it, and then hope that no one called. And I was like, I can't do that. And they're like, well, we have to have you on this full time. And I'm like, but what about the other 30 projects? Well, they'll just have to wait. And I said, well, shouldn't I tell them that, to set realistic expectations? And they were like, no, we don't do that. We just hope that they don't call. And it was the most frustrating thing ever. And I was like, this is the craziest thing ever. But that's one of the things that, sets me off on my things that enrage me, because I can't stand being put in a position where I'm not being transparent and I'm putting myself and setting myself up for failure, because either I say nothing and then hope no one calls, which I don't think is very realistic, or I figure out how to make it work by working nonstop over my free time, which isn't fair to me. And then I'm going to be tired, and then I'm going to have health problems. So, you got to really think about that as you're trying to be resilient, is how to address the issues that compound your stress. So I wanted to share this quote with you. And this is about community and social support and resilience. A joy shared is a joy doubled. A sorrow shared is a sorrow halved. So if you think about that, that really goes to the heart of what community is. Whether we're talking about a family, a community organization, a professional organization like NAOP, a political organization, any group you belong to, a church, when you have people that you can share your experiences, it's almost cathartic because you just speak to them and you feel heard and validated. And often people will even suggest things to you like, if it was me, because, all of us like to give our 2 cents. If it was me, I would do it this way, or, I can't believe that, I can't believe that person did that to you. And it feels better because it's almost like an embrace from the community saying, hey, you were right. You shouldn't have been treated that way, or that shouldn't have happened to you. So the social systems are something that we need to develop more if we don't already have them. And if we have some and we have, as a result of social distancing, not been as active, because I know like church, for instance, we weren't really going because it was difficult to social distance there. And then like they moved the services and they were like spreading people across, and then people went to the parking lot. And so it was all sorts of awkward. But the reality is that some of the churches went online, and I guess it would mean really reaching out to some folks that you either knew or want to know and say, hey, I know we're not going to church right now, but how's about, we just kind of keep touch during the week in Facebook or on an email and just touch base. And, it's important for me to kind of keep in touch with my church family and know that, I'm there to support them as well as there to support me. And it may seem a little awkward, but I mean, people will welcome that because of the fact that people are feeling kind of out of sorts right now. This is unprecedented, that we can't do the things we always were accustomed to doing. So another benefit of those community memberships is that you learn from other people. You know how we were talking about how you might have a conversation, you shared your situation, and someone else might say, when that happened to me, I did this. Well, you also learn in that way how that person coped with the situation. And that helps you be more resilient because it may be that's the option of all the options you hadn't thought of. That's the solution to your problem. So you learn from your community. And they found in studies that during disasters, those people that are in pre-existing organizations and communities fare better with adversity than those people who are alone. It's a lot of stress to be alone during a horrific thing like this. So having some sense of community, and honestly, I'm going to go back to that NAOP professional development group. We really got to know each other well during that and learned a little bit about our areas and what was going on. And it felt like we had never really done it that way before. Like we would have calls or something, but this time we did it on Zoom. We saw each other. We learned more about each person's situation and how the impact of COVID-19 was affecting them in their particular area. And as well as what they were afraid of, because we were all thinking we might get laid off at that point. So again, it really does help to have community support. So I also want to talk to you about organizational resilience. Our organizations, let's be honest, they all had probably a emergency response plan, right? Everybody had an emergency response plan. But we never really thought the emergency would be that would force us to go with everything online. That's one of the things we had never really thought about. Or like everyone needed a Zoom license. Or when Zoom was having issues and it wasn't private, what do we do? What do we use? Can we use something else? So we had a lot of different situations where we hadn't identified this emerging threat of pandemic, and so we hadn't formulated any options for technology. So although we have technology, we don't necessarily always use it very often. Like we could use technology at our institution to have meetings between our campuses, and sometimes we would have people drive an hour and a half to a meeting when they could just use the technology in the first place and avoid the gas, the commute, all those expenses and the stress of all that, and just done it remotely. It wasn't in our organizational culture to do things remotely. It just wasn't, unless there was no other choice. And so now that we have had no other choice, our expectations are changing. We've also looked at staff members and faculty members working as a unified team. We had all sorts of committees formulated to help with different aspects of responding to COVID. And that has helped us to kind of get feedback to those committees as to issues that they need to address that they hadn't thought of, and really clear organizational objectives. So our objectives really are learning and preventing people from getting sick on our campus. That's really our two organizational objectives at this point. So everything kind of is involved with that in some way, shape, or form. The reality of that is that we're getting to be more resilient as an organization because we've had to be more flexible, think on the cuff of what we're going to do, research and reach out to other institutions to figure out what they're doing so we don't reinvent the wheel. And not just institutions close by, because a lot of times we would just go to our peer institutions to see what our peer institutions were doing. But now when someone says something about COVID, we need to know, I'm like, no, I'm going to research all the institutions I can find, because not necessarily are all the Mississippi institutions going to be reflective of the best scenario. I need to look at a wider scope of institutions. Even our peer ones may not be the ones that we want to use as our model. So really the organization has to be willing to do all those things, and you as a member of the organization contribute to their ability to do all those things through your volunteerism, your contribution to any kind of feedback to the committees, and then working with the stakeholders across the campus community. Because like I said, I get calls all the time for strange things that they haven't thought of, or even tech things that probably aren't necessarily, you know, with being compliance my area, but they'll call because I used to be in iTech. So they'll be like, oh, I have a question. So here is some tips on increasing your resilience at work. And it's similar to the other tips, except for it's probably a little bit more detailed. The part I want to highlight of all this is the celebration aspect. Again, it's easier to be positive if you do it across the board. So you'll see that we have celebrate successes. So every time that you finish a project or you complete something that you were working on during the week, like you had a week and you created a course or something, or you formulated a new proposal, celebrate that. You know, you accomplished something that no one else has done. That's unique to you. It's successful. It was approved. It's out of your hands. It's over. And so you should celebrate that. You also can develop goals, and then you can celebrate achieving those goals. So like when I took my comprehensive exam, I celebrated that by taking myself out to ice cream. And I was like, I'm going to celebrate that. That was before COVID though. But, you know, you could always Uber the ice cream, I guess, to yourself. And then hopefully it's not melted. It's just like a change in mentality, but celebrate the little things. It really makes a big difference. Look at how you can take positive steps in negative situations. So if you have a situation with someone when they're not communicating effectively, maybe sit down with them and talk to them about how you can improve that. Again, people do respect candor and just giving them, you know, what's up and saying, hey, this is the situation. I want for us to work more productively together. I know we're both stressed out, and you can definitely use that COVID as an excuse for anything and say, you know, I'm so stressed out right now. I really just want to talk to you about how we can work together better. We're both working from home. It's a little bit difficult, and we're having some awkward moments. So let's figure out how we can do this and make our lives easier, and so we can both rest easy at night. And you kind of turn it into a positive situation from a negative, but you haven't cast blame on anyone. You've cast blame on COVID, and as it should be. Be realistic, don't dwell on the past. And I think that's also, you know, both dealing with relationships as well as your own personal history. Resiliency, I'm going to share something from some research I did a long time ago. Resiliency is also possibly affected by genetics. There have been some studies of twins as well as people whose parents were in the Holocaust, where they had lower levels of resiliency and were more apt to develop PTSD, because that is the opposite of resiliency. When you don't have any resiliency left, you develop PTSD. And so they developed this, but they found out it was genetically happening because the trauma that their parents suffered had caused a change in the gene, epigenetic mutation in their genes that made them more susceptible to developing PTSD. That's also the case in rape. So again, it's important not to dwell on the past, not deny it, because obviously that's not effective either, but you kind of have to move forward and kind of live in today to cope with things. Also, you want to avoid drama. Everyone knows that we have stress and that there's a lot of changes going on, but there's no reason for that to cause drama between individuals or in departments. We have to really learn from our problems. And again, we're really trying to foster both a positive outlook for ourselves as well as positive relationships with others. Because remember, those are your community, your work community, and they may also prove a source of support for you, so that it makes you stronger and gives you feedback and gives you some options of ways to solve your problems, which makes your life easier anyway. This is the thing I wanted to recommend in terms of optimism, because optimism is one of those awkward things where I think to myself, how could you increase optimism? I mean, I think you're either optimistic or you're not, or at least that was my initial understanding of it. But I think you have to really kind of focus in on your thought processes. So to understand that in a way that is feasible is going to be, looks like a multi-tiered approach. The bottom one there, controlling your thoughts, is all about self-talk. It's a lecture about self-talk, and he just kind of practically approaches that and kind of tells you that it's important that you understand that the most natural reaction you have, again, is for your brain to do the same thing it did in the past. So if you have a fear or a challenge, you're going to react the way you did in the past. But more than likely, that is not the healthy way. That is the flight or fight response in your amygdala. So that is not what you want to do. You have to take control of that situation and move away from just reacting, because that's your emotional reaction. Meditation, just having that time to think through things and kind of hear yourself and your thoughts and figure out how you can change those thoughts into being positive. So if you had a really stressful day, say, you know, instead of saying, you know, oh God, that day was so horrible, say, look at how I was able to get through this day, regardless of how it was. And I got my stuff done and I'm still here, you know, and that's, you know, that's a testament to your tenacity, that no matter what's been thrown at you and all these strange things that are happening, both at home and in the world at large, we're all still here. We're all still working. We're all still coping. We're all still succeeding in our jobs. Those are things to celebrate. Those are things to look at optimistically and as a measure of who we are and our ability to bounce back. Because if you think about it, most of us really didn't go home to do nothing. Most of us were working from home. So it's not like we really had an opportunity to just sit here and think about what happened and how it's affected us, and if we've had any loved ones that have passed away as a result of this, or even just the fear of, you know, what if I don't have the right mask on, or what if I forget to do this, or what if I go to the wrong place? I mean, it's just so many unknowns now. So, I mean, that's really important that you just take some time to think about things and think about them in terms of how you can move that negative chatter to happiness. And so I've got some small ones in there. There's even one in there, you know, and everyone has 2 minutes, right? There's no one on here that doesn't have 2 minutes, right? Right? So there's one there, 2-minute happiness meditation. Just 2 minutes. Close your door and say, this is my meditation time. 2 minutes and you're done. And then it just puts your mind, kind of like recharges it so that you can kind of look at things from a different perspective. And as as we all know, it takes 21 days to formulate a habit. So it's going to take a while to change those negative thoughts into positive ones and to change things so that you're looking at things from a happy perspective. And again, there are a couple of apps there, and they look at journaling. One is just that Happy Jar. Happy Jar is actually cute if anyone has an iPhone. You load things, right? Like pictures or songs, and then and videos, and then you shake the little phone, right? And it gives you something happy to look at, and it just makes you happy. So, I mean, it's almost like instant, you know? So you would load the things that are important to you into the Happy Jar, and then when you need a little moment of happiness, you just shake your phone, after you pull up the app, and it will give you something that makes you happy, something you've already determined makes you happy. So it's super cute, but it's also very effective because it's to the root of the problem. You need to be happy. Here's something that you've identified makes you happy. So I highly recommend that. I wish I had an iPhone. I was looking at the demo of it on YouTube, and it looks great. So if anyone tries it, let me know, because I think my next phone is going to be going back to an iPhone. And then the Happify one is just a range of activities, including journaling. Again, journaling, self-reflection, those things are all important and really getting you to the point where you recognize what your first response is going to be. And honestly, it's going to be a fight or flight response until you can train yourself away from that and not let, as the one guy said that was giving the lecture, don't let your brain do what's easiest for it. It's going to take work because your brain just wants to fight or run away. You know, that's its two options. That's its natural baseline instincts. And you got to move away from that so that you can be resilient. Because the longer you're embroiled in that emotional fight or flight response, the longer you cannot get back to where you were okay. The more you're just kind of like, oh, I don't know what's going on. I'm just so sad. I'm just so upset. I'm so angry. And that's what you've got to move away from. So those are all important things. And that is the end of our presentation. There are many, 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 many references. But if you have any questions, like I said, please feel free to email me, or we can take some questions if anybody has any. Usually it takes a while. And like I said, you might want to look through a presentation before you formulate a question. I'm just going to see if there were any questions in the chat. Yeah, and you know, one of the things I really challenge you is, and this is one of the ones, and I'm a sharer, so, and you probably already know that about me, those of you that know me, I'm a sharer. So like my mom is different than me, so each person is unique. So my mom was a victim of sexual abuse when she was a child. I was a victim of that when I was a teenager. But we deal with it differently. So not everyone can do the same thing, but it's important that you figure out what happened to you and kind of recognize that it made you who you are. It has made you stronger, but unlike what people perceive, you may not be as strong as people think you are, you know? And I think that's the danger of it, because people think you're strong, so they don't feel like they need to extend support to you, because they're like, oh, so-and-so is so good. Look at her, just bounce right back. But we're all really good at acting like we're really good, like we feel really good. We've learned to kind of appear 100% when sometimes we're struggling. And that's the most important thing, especially during these times. I know you've heard in the news, on the internet, that people are struggling and there's more mental health issues because this is a stressful time. Everything we know and have experienced as our normal no longer exists, and people are very testy. I'll be honest with you, I will mark this as a point of reference so you can see. Hattiesburg is not big on people honking at people. And I'm telling you, I have been honked at in the last 3 weeks, probably about 6 or 7 times. And it's like the light turns and people honk. And that's not, we're in the deep South. People are usually relatively polite. That is not, you know, that is not a thing that's common, but people are very stressed, you know, and people don't know how to reach out to other people, but you should not be bothered by or ashamed to reach out to others. You know, I'm here, all our NAMP friends are here. Anybody, I feel like if they knew that you needed them, they would be more than willing to extend some time to listen and give advice or just listen. Because honestly, just being validated and heard helps a lot. So if you don't have someone to reach out to, feel free to reach out to me. And I know, like I said, church community, our NAOP groups, we have a lot of people that we could reach out to. Don't suffer in silence if this is a lot, because this has been a cataclysmic change in everything we know and perceive, and it is very stressful. So I'm just hoping that we'll get back to the normal, and this will seem like a bad dream, but we will be the stronger for it, because that it is making us, it's forcing us to become more resilient. So hopefully today's tips will give you some insight into what you can do to kind of support your growth into a more resilient person, and that will make it easier, you know, because we really don't know how long this is going to last. You know, some people say 2 more months, some people say 1 more year, who's to know? So hopefully this gives you some resources. And again, you can email me at jennifer.lewis@usm.edu, and I'm glad to send the presentation so you can have access to all those links for those apps. And if somebody does try that Happy Jar, please let me know, because I feel like that is the most interesting thing that I wish they had it for Android. I really do. Well, it has been a pleasure presenting to everyone. I'm glad to see y'all. And I hope everyone is staying safe in their place. And, you know, the only reason I'm not wearing a mask is because I'm by myself with my dogs. So hopefully they're good. So everyone take care. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present. Stay safe.
Mm.